Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Faruk Kazi. Professor Kazi has received his PhD from Systems and Control Engineering at IIT Mumbai. He's currently a professor and Dean R&D at VJTI Mumbai. He also works as an advisor to SAID for their SAR EP program. He works in the domain of cyber physical systems and critical infrastructure security. The research interests includes SCADA, ICS, and OT security. He is currently chair of WG3, which is Digital Architecture and Cybersecurity of Smart Grid Forum ISGF. He's listed on the Snyder Wall of Thanks for securing their product, SCADA Pack RTU. His team has discovered more than 40 vulnerabilities in OT products of OEMs like Snyder, ABB, GE, Rockwell Automation, Mitsubishi, SCL, etc. He was invited as a visiting research scholar at Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, EPFL, Switzerland, and Tufts University, Boston, USA. He has delivered invited talks and presented his research work at MIT, USA, Supelec, CNRS, Paris, and other venues. He has over 100 research papers to his credit. He has received project funding from many government organizations as well as private organizations. So I request Professor Kazi to take over. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for very nice introduction, and thank you organizers for inviting me here and allowing me to speak on some topic on which I am working for last around 10 to 13 years. That is nothing but cybersecurity of critical infrastructure, challenges and way forward. So basically I had prepared my talk. So prepare my talk in such a way that we'll start with the problem formulation, try to understand some basic idea about what is going on, because recently you must be seeing a lot of media coverage coming across on various cyber attacks which are happening on critical infrastructure. Energy or power grid become one of the major domain on which this kind of cyber attacks are happening. So we'll try to see that, but we will use the angle of cyber physical system, particularly since the academic community gets resonated well with that particular term. So we will have a bulk of our idea coming from the domain of cyber physical, and then we will try to see what are the practical solutions being adopted by the industry. And that would be concluding my talk here. So starting from the problem, ending towards the solution is the path that I'm following. So I'll be requesting the timekeeper to please inform me when we are in the vicinity of closure or the time limit. So this is the outline as I mentioned. So let me begin first with the motivation, or let me begin first with the introduction with respect to the cyber attacks which are happening on critical infrastructure. I have tried to create the slides as much as possible by avoiding jargons, because this actually falls in the interdisciplinary area. People need a little bit of background from computer science part, then some kind of instrumentation, electrical engineering or systems theory, etc. So considering the cross-platform of the audience and the interdisciplinary nature of the subject, I try to keep it as minimum jargon as possible and as smooth flowing as possible without much of the prerequisite. However, in between, whenever I feel based upon the requirement of the research community, I would be talking about certain specific wordings, but I will try to keep as much as possible as a general free flow type of session. So let me begin with the motivation first, or introduction first. If I am to talk about the face of cyber attacks much recently, then you may be thinking about certain kind of instances. Probably the first one which might come to you as an individual is, suddenly on one fine day you see that your screen has some kind of message with a black or a blue type of background saying that you have been hacked. That is our first introduction, and we suddenly start finding whether my system were not antivirus installed, or was there any other pen drive which was inserted which actually compromised my system. So that used to be traditionally way of thinking about cyber attack for quite some time. Then we also got exposed for certain kind of defacing of the websites. Typically when we reach to some Independence Day celebration or maybe Republic Day celebration, or there is some G20 summit happening nearby, and suddenly couple of government websites used to go down, having certain messages of terrorist organization, their ideology or whatever they wanted to promote as a propaganda, that used to be appearing on certain kind of website. That used to be our second introduction of cyber incident or cyber attack. Much recently, right from the Nigerian lotteries or Jamtara type of events which are happening, where you get some kind of email saying that somebody died in South Africa and that person has kept some 500 Great Britain pound in your name, and you need to just fill in this form. Some link used to come, or some kind of text message used to come to you to click it, and then just to find out next fine day that all your account is wiped out. So our understanding of cyber attacks or cyber threat used to be confined only this kind of handful type of incidences. And if I today also ask you to just close your eyes and think about the hacker, what kind of imagination you get, probably you would be imagining till today also, hacker means somebody who is wearing hoodies and the cap in the other way round, maybe 18 to 25-year-old, either college dropout or a disgruntled one who feels that his talent is not being accepted, appreciated by the world, and he need to find out some avenues to showcase his talent. So that is what we used to get the impression of the hacker till now, till very recently. So this was the scenario for at least 30-40 years till very recently. What has suddenly changed as compared to this phase of cyber threat is the news which broke out in 2011 that in Iran, when they were trying to develop some uranium enrichment plant, some virus named Stuxnet impacted their centrifugal pump. And suddenly they started getting those pump damaged in thousands of quantity, and nobody was understanding what is going wrong. The reason was the same thing as we saw in the previous slide, that everybody had impression of cyber attack means something related to information is being done, either confidentiality, integrity or availability. So those were our viewpoint, that when we used to say cyber attack, we used to talk about information. But the physical world getting impacted was never thought of before this news broke out with respect to this Iranian nuclear power plant got compromised. So people before that used to feel that my industrial control systems, my SCADA systems are air-gapped. Air-gapped means those are not connected to the internet, they are not connected to the external world, and since they are not connected to the external world, there is no possibility that hackers will be getting into my system. But in 2011, first time people realized that I can put malware into a programmable logic controller. I can have some kind of compromise into my industrial control system. So I can actually infiltrate into my variable frequency drive. So people started understanding seriousness of this particular cyber threat from this particular incident called as a Stuxnet. So what they did was, there was some enrichment plant secretly being created by the Iran. I hope this phase many of you must have recollected. So they were in a plan of having some kind of dirty bomb for which the uranium enrichment was required to be done. That enrichment was happening in a centrifugal pump which was supposed to be running at a very precise rotation speed, because the isotopes were actually only minutely different in their mass, and the centrifugal pump to separate them out was required to be very precisely rotating, and the entire industrial control system, the plant that it was having, got compromised. Actually, a complete movie is available, a documentary is available on this particular incident. For those who are keen on exploring it further, there are ample number of literature and the material available on this. But this was an eye-opener. This was the first incident where the myth of air gap was busted, that our industrial control systems, automation systems are no longer secure by just of having a garb of air gap. So that was the first one. Although this community working in the industrial control system were not very much receptive to the cyber related ideas that ever they can get compromised. Typically in instrumentation, they were more focused on the performance of the system. So plants and other things were designed with performance as the main criteria. Cybersecurity was never a criteria. So they were never accepting that that can ever happen on their plant. So that was the first myth busted, and people started recognizing. However, the academic community had made red flag much before than this incident. So a group of PhD research scholars were working on some similar type of platform like Google. So as we know very well that the search engine that Google developed in academic environment, you can give some kind of text, and related to that, wherever information is available, that Google or like search engines will identify and give it to you as a result. Parallelly, there was another group of researchers working on developing search engine, but not for searching text sentences, instead for searching physical assets. Those physical assets can be webcams, those can be routers, those can be the programmable logic controllers, RTUs, IEDs, which are used in the power plant. It can be wind turbine, etc. Typically IoT type of devices and all those which get connected to the internet. So it's a similar type of search engine, and they were very much giving information that there is nothing like air gap. All your devices are available on the internet, but nobody was looking at them seriously because that was an academic project, and people used to see that or say that these things or these results are not actually depicting the real industrial environment. But then Stuxnet cleared the entire air. So not just air gap was a myth, but there were a couple of other myths in which people were much finding comfort zone. The other myth was that hackers do not understand industrial control system, SCADA systems, and their protocols. Again, this myth was because of a traditional understanding of the hackers. So why would some college going 18 to 23-year person would go and get a PLC and do the reverse engineering? Why would that be done? And secondly, these devices are not available over the counter. So it's not that you can go and say that I want a relay to be purchased or I want IED to be purchased. Those kind of things required some kind of sanitization or end user certification. So everybody was quite clear that although my systems may be vulnerable, the hackers would not get idea about that vulnerability because access to those devices and protocol was restricted, not much available in a public domain. So that was the second myth that people were living into. And the reason they were living in that myth, as I told you, their understanding of threat actor was something else. They used to feel script kiddies, hobbyists, or the college going kids are the hackers. Slowly, when the second incident happened, they suddenly woke up to the reality that the threat actors are not script kiddies or college going kids, but they are nation state actors. So during the Stuxnet, they came to know that this is not a handicraft of any amateur person. It is actually a much devoted effort by a couple of nation state actors, not only one, who had full up resources, full up motivation. They had complete idea of what they are doing. And the reason was that this cyber attack was carried out as a borderless war or a proxy war. Till that time, people used to feel that cyber attack is by cyber criminals. At the most, it can be some terrorist group or small group which is doing some kind of corporate espionage. First time people started realizing that it's not just script kiddies, but the nation state actors are there because wars are no longer fought on border. A lot of proxy war goes beyond that borderless nature as well. And that eye-opener came in the second incident. The first one was the Stuxnet, where people realized that there is no air gap. The second eye-opener came in 2015 and subsequently repeated in 2016 when Black Energy 3 malware was found, sabotaged the Ukrainian Discom or distribution utilities. So there were two different years. In the chilling winter of 2015, I am sure everybody is aware about the hostile weather conditions of Ukraine in December. Somewhere around minus 40 degrees centigrade is the usual temperature, where room heating systems are on electrical energy. And just imagine a scenario, in that minus 40 degrees centigrade, people suddenly realize that there is no power, there is a power outage, which lasted for almost 6 hours of time. Now the cyber attack on Black Energy 3 in itself is again a one day complete analysis session, and I'll be just giving you pointer as I mentioned about the Stuxnet. It'll be very interesting for you being engineering student to look at this Ukrainian power grid attack. Again, enough material is available in the public domain. The way in which they carried out this attack, you can appreciate the brilliance of planning was, it took around 6 to 8 months to do some kind of recon phase, to understand which SCADA servers are there, which IEDs are there, what is make, what is version. They could find out what are those vulnerabilities. If those vulnerabilities are not available, they purchased in the dark web something called as a 0 days. So those who are not from computer science background, 0 days means vulnerabilities in the device, but there is no patch available, and even OEM is not aware about that vulnerability. Means nobody knows about that vulnerability. And those type of vulnerabilities are generally sold in $1 million in the dark web. So they purchase such kind of 0 days and launch the cyber attack. Now there is nothing great about they launching the cyber attack. What I wanted to just give you idea about how these nation state actors with full of motivation and resources can plan. Now when the attack happens, power grid people are generally prepared for contingency analysis, because that is a trained kind of structure that they will go for N-1 contingency, N-1 contingency, whatever strongest contingency planning is to be done. So clearly they also had a contingency planning ready. So if something has gone down, the outage is being reported, they are well trained to respond to that. They started responding as well. And they realized that the RTUs, the breakers and other field devices, they had one more virus called as kill disk, where all those configuration files were also wiped out. So that was the secondary attack, amplifying attack. Now that is still okay. Then they realized that the power supply, since for 6 hours it is not there, we need to turn on, or it should automatically turn on my UPS system. That was also compromised. Then people sitting in the minus 40 degrees centigrade, no electricity, you can just imagine a panic. And those customers must have started calling to the call centers of those utilities. And they did something called as a denial of service or DOS attack on the telephone network as well, so that the customer's call were not reaching to the utility. So you can just imagine the primary attack, secondary, tertiary, and the way in which they had actually created the complete attack chain. Now this happened in 2015, because that time, now anyway that Russia and Ukraine war, full-fledged war is going on. That time it was not a full-fledged, that time it was a proxy type of war. And this type of cyber attack generally happen with one typical sentence called as power projection. So what this military doctrine about power projection says is, as a country, I will demonstrate my ability to penetrate into your geographical space and do some kind of activity. If I can take the leverage, the surgical strike is one that kind of activity, because we know very well with one surgical strike, we cannot wipe out terrorists, but that is a message which needs to go, that I have ability to respond to that. So this was something like that in 2015, and in 2016, again in the month of December, it was repeated. But there is one interesting thing which I would like to draw your attention. I don't know how many of you can see the slide here, that if I compare 2015 and 2016 attack, I'll read out for you because I just want to tell you how this particular field is leading to a much more sophistication and precision of attack. In 2015, 50 plus substations got impacted by that particular cyber campaign. Around 225k customers got impacted, and the total outage was 135 megawatt. So the attack which happened in 2015 was having this kind of spread across impact. 2016 was much calibrated with much precision. They targeted only one substation, but the outage they could impact was around 200 megawatt. So now you can understand that how rapidly this field is growing and how sophistication is coming in the area of cyber attacks on the critical infrastructure. So Stuxnet was the first one, eye-opener in 2010-11. 15 and 16 was another eye-opener because when Stuxnet happened, people thought it's okay, that is one-off event which generally happens and we don't have to focus too much of attention to this. But then this happened successively in 2 years. Now, while these two have attracted a lot of glamour about this particular area, there are many other attacks which were happening quite frequently. Although these two, because of geopolitical nature and the names of nation-state actors which were involved, it got a glamour because when somebody says Iranian nuclear power plant got compromised, people know to whom to look at it. And then suddenly it attracts the glamour. For Ukraine, people know who would be involved in carrying out that attack. But in addition to those, there were quite a few other attacks which has happened. In Aramco, almost every month, there is one incident which is reported. Everywhere across the globe, all those things were happening as the cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. Now, although those were happening, in India, we were still finding our comfort zone. So we were saying, it's okay, that's Middle East, that's otherwise also a burning geopolitical issue. Russia and Ukraine, we know that the kind of impression both the heads of state carries and their way of functioning. So we used to feel that ye to dunya mein ho raha hai. Why should I be worried much about in India? So in India, we got a first shocker in 2019 when on social media, Twitter or now being called as X, some researcher posted a sentence saying that our Kudankulam nuclear power plant systems got compromised by a malware. On that day, Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited said that nothing like that has happened. The research community started following that news and started putting out the proofs of that compromise in the social media. And on the next day, on October 20th, 2019, the NPCL itself came up with a press release saying that indeed the incident happened. Our IT systems got compromised, but OT systems could not get impacted by this. So at this point, I need to tell you what is IT and OT so that we can follow the remaining discussion. So IT, we all know. IT is our information technology, where you talk about computer, laptop, server, networking devices, cloud, and all those things. OT means operational technology, which controls your process. So that can be a SCADA system, that can be your programmable logic controller, that can be RTU, that can be IED, that can be relay, and all those kind of safety instrumentation system. Those are called as OT, which controls the entire process. So in further investigation, it was found that the attack indeed happened. Couple of machines in the IT layer, corporate network got compromised. But luckily for us and luckily for the world, that attack couldn't percolate down to the OT systems, where actual nuclear power plant being operated. Otherwise, you can just imagine the catastrophic scenario that we would have seen had it passed from IT to OT. Whatever it may be, one thing was very clearly or made very evidently here is that India is also target of such kind of cyber attacks. Only problem here is, unlike other attacks, this cyber attack need not come from our geographical adversary. It can come from anywhere. And then when this forensic evidences and other things were investigated, they found that the attack had emanated from the North Korean hacker group. Some APT groups belonging to the North Korea. APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat Group, and they had some kind of previous history of targeting such kind of critical infrastructure. So this was the first time India also woke up to the reality that although we are not in the Middle East, we are not in the major hub of Russia or Ukraine, that does not mean that our systems won't be affected by such kind of cyber attacks in future. Now, while this was happening in 2019, 2020, 12th October 2020, suddenly we got a news that Mumbai power outage has happened, and close to another 6 hours or so, we were unable to restore the power in Mumbai. Now, there were a lot of debate going on with people working from electrical engineering viewpoint. They had some different opinion saying that it's not a cyber incident, but it was actually system study or system related issue. There were a couple of other people, particularly media houses, who wanted to spice it up because Galwan Valley incident had happened somewhere near about, and they wanted to link it to that Galwan Valley incident. And suddenly a news article came in the Wall Street Journal citing some data from Recorded Future, another threat intel company from USA, saying that indeed it was having some cyber related angle. Now, it's not a forum to give a binary answer whether indeed it was cyber or a system problem, but keeping it aside, the possibility cannot be ruled out. And the reason the possibility cannot be ruled out was, after 1 year, Tata Power got impacted by a malware called as ransomware, where all their system data was encrypted and people were unable to access their own data because the encryption key was being provided only when you pay them to some ransom in the $1 million, in the Bitcoin, of course. So Tata Power decided that we will not do that. Instead, we have our previous backup and we will restore our system. They did that. But the point that I want to make here is that India is also very much of target of such kind of cyber attacks, and our critical infrastructure, including energy, is very much at the forefront of receiving such kind of cyber attacks. So for Mumbai network, we were part of the inquiry committee. I was part of 5 inquiry committees, which did from electrical viewpoint as well as from cyber viewpoint. So that's why I told you that giving binary answer whether it was a cyber or not is not a correct idea. But one thing that we can surely agree that our systems are vulnerable and we are at the target of such kind of threat actors. That is for sure, without any doubt, which all we can agree. So while giving you this motivation and why are we looking into this particular important topic from research point of view is, what has challenged or changed is the way in which threat actors used to play in this particular cyberspace. So earlier, the threat actors, as I have mentioned, were 18 to 23-year-old college-going kid, most often a thrill-seeking or probably a hobbyist, sometimes called as script kiddies, who found his or her passion in writing code and then executing that. And those people were mainly the responsible for most of the cyber attacks. What is now happening is the change wherein we are getting nation-state actors or groups which are supported by government organization. And when we say nation-state actors, they have sophisticated means, they have extended resources, more importantly, they have system-specific knowledge as well. So let's say if I am to target a particular SCADA system, then for my laboratory experience, I need to purchase that, find out how my attack can percolate, do some kind of coding, scripting based upon that. That amount of money can only be provided when there is nation-state actor behind this. Otherwise, it is very tough for an individual to foray or venture into this particular area. So this has radically changed the space. So if I am to conclude at this particular point, wherein introduction or motivation can be summarized by following key points, that industrial control system, SCADA systems are indeed vulnerable to cyber attack. There is nothing like air gap on which we can rely. The involvement of nation-state actor in recent incident is very, very, very evident and proven as well with much of the forensic evidences. The ransomware attacks on the energy utilities are increasing. I gave you example of Tata Power. They agreed, they released the press release to Bombay Stock Exchange where that is listed. So it is very clearly authenticated that ransomware attacks are increasing. And further what is happening is, everybody is in rush to go for digital transformation. Everybody wants to go for IoT. Everybody wants to deploy AI, machine learning solutions on their system for operator decision making. Everybody would like to go for advanced communication technologies which are coming up. So in that particular race, if there is no attention given to the cyber related eventualities, we probably would be going totally in the wrong direction. So what people are now thinking about is, how can we make cyber aware digital transformation? That is what people are now looking for. So this is a conclusion of the first, where we defined some kind of motivation examples like Stuxnet, Ukraine, India, and all those things, just to highlight that whatever we are discussing is a reality. And next decade, believe me or not, would be much dependent upon how we secure our critical infrastructure. Now, having understood the problem, let's try to understand in a more sophisticated manner, for which we would like to take a route of cyber physical systems. Because unless we come out of the mindset of industrial control systems, SCADA systems, we may probably not appreciate the cyber related contingencies. So let me just draw attention to a word called as cyber physical system. I hope many of you must be aware about this, and there may be some active research group also working in the cyber physical system. Typically this word was launched by NSF in USA somewhere around 2006, and a lot of US universities started their research focus around cyber physical system. So those were the early push given to the research community to start looking at the cyber physical. So what the cyber physical system says, if I am to explain to you, then it is much easier, because name itself has everything. So it basically has two vertical. One is cyber, another one is physical. So I would be having some physical infrastructure, and I want to leverage control, computing, and communication, these three cyber aspects, so as to make it or improve stability, performance, reliability, robustness, and efficiency. So whole purpose is, I have some legacy system, and I know that AI ML is at my disposal. So I would like to leverage and achieve these many performance benefits. If I'm to give you one example, or before I talk about example, academia actually calls it with different names, depending upon how you would like to interpret. Although cyber physical system is a broad name which is given, system theoretical research group would call this as a hybrid system or network systems. People would also call this as, so typically those who work in AI ML, they'll call as machine to machine. Some industries will call this as a phygital, just to combine physical and digital. And the manifestation of this academic word of cyber physical appears in energy sector, manufacturing, transportation, water, wastewater, etc. But since this is electrical audience, I would like to take the example of energy sector, so that we can understand what exactly mean by the cyber physical, if you are not from that background. But I saw that there is a session specifically on cyber physical system. There is a track which is running. So I assume that there is a level of understanding early existence in the audience. But just to align my talk with the cyber physical, so if I talk about the energy sector, so in the physical domain, I would be talking about generation, transmission, and distribution. So it can be thermal power plant, hydro, or whatever, renewable, etc. So I'll have generation, the transmission network, and the distribution or discoms. These are my legacy system, physical system, where I will have huge towers, substations, relays, etc. I would like to integrate that with a sophisticated cyber environment. And as I mentioned, I would like to use advanced control. So many people nowadays, along with the SCADA, would like to go for synchrophasers, where they would like to put a phasor measurement unit by which you can take real-time information. Or I may be having some kind of device which sees health of my transformer, power transformer. So I can be having some IoT-based health monitoring system which are connected. I may also be having some AI ML tool as some kind of operator decision support systems. So in case of SLDCs or grid operator, I would be having a complete dashboard. But as a human, my understanding may not be that sophisticated or precise. So I can use some AI ML techniques which would be helping me to arrive at some decision. So combination of this which people now call as a smart grid, becomes obviously one example of a cyber physical system. So I hope this idea is very much clear. And once this idea is clear, then understanding of cyber attacks will be much clearer now. The reason is, when I'm trying to integrate cyber layer, probably if I'm not having enough attention given, I may be making certain vulnerable points or hackable point in my system. And this is what is happening currently nowadays. So of course we cannot go back in the electromechanical relay era of 10 years. We cannot go back in the Stone Age. We will have to adopt this. But while adopting this, what care need to be taken is something which we would be keen on understanding. But before I go on the next slide, since I belong to the systems and control community, so a lot of researchers are focusing their attention, because this talk is primarily, like as I told you, avoiding all the buzz and other things. So the research community, particularly from systems theory point of view, are trying to see how can I do modeling of this. There are a lot of challenges when I do modeling. The reason is this physical system works in analog domain, because I have voltages, currents, etc., which evolve as a continuous function of time, whereas digital will be in terms of my discrete time events or digital events. So if I am to look holistically about cyber physical system, what can be the appropriate mathematical framework? Because half of the part is analog, half of the part is digital. So people are coming up with the modeling approaches which talks about hybrid automata. Some initial work, so cyber physical systems started appearing in research community, as I told, somewhere around 2006. NSF started giving grant, and the publication started appearing in IEEE and other journals somewhere around 2010 onwards. So initial efforts were based upon some Petri net type of models. People were also going for bond graph type of models for this hybrid automata. People were looking from game theoretic approaches as well, since it is a cyber attack, and how the resiliency can be showcased. So a complete attack types were mapped mathematically in one early paper of Francisco Bullo, how the system theoretic approach can be cast into this particular cyber physical system. So one very well celebrated paper on this, for those who would like to take this as the research direction, many of you must have taken, and very well known in that community is, of course, Manimaran Govindarasu's paper, which is much celebrated and referred. From electrical energy point of view, Kundu's work is one of the pioneering work in this particular domain. So a lot of work from academia is coming. Number one, how can I do mathematical modeling of this? What kind of stability notions I can apply? I am well aware about when I say linear system or linear time invariant system, I can talk about the possibilities in which stability can be analyzed. For nonlinear system, I know how I can analyze the stability. But when I'm having such kind of hybrid system, how can I look at it as a stability? Then people from the community of time delay system and those who study about that, they started looking at it as a real life example about the closed loop control system where time delay can exist, because you are having some sensors which are measuring your physical world. It goes to your cyber. Some computation will happen and the control signal will be coming up. So what would be implication of time delay, packet loss, packet delay, jitter on the stability? That is one of the area where a lot of researchers are working, because when we say cyber physical system, these things are imminent. These are bound to happen. On how can I talk about the stability? Observability is one challenging issue when we talk about the cyber physical system. While the academia was calling this a cyber physical system and devoting their attention and research efforts in that direction, industry was calling it by some other name. So industry people were calling this as fourth industrial revolution, or they were calling as industrial IoT type of approach. So academia was looking at one perspective because they have some focus of research, and industry was looking for deployment point of view, and they started calling this cyber physical system as a fourth industrial revolution, where we expect that machine to machine communication will happen. they will start interacting with each other, and as much as possible, the human in loop would be minimized. That was the idea when people started looking from Industry 4.0. So that was the industry's viewpoint. Now, a lot of people talk about which is subset of what. Is CPS is subset of Industry 4.0 or IoT or vice versa, etc. Now, there is no meaning talking about that kind of relationship or drawing any kind of parallels or talking about subset and superset. The reason is cyber physical system in itself manifests in various forms. It can be a single device where you have cyber and physical interaction happening. Very classical example of this particular manifestation is our wearable devices, where your physical parameter like your heart rate, how many steps you have walked in the morning, and that analysis going in the cloud computing platform, which tells you how many calories you have burned after doing the complete computation, is one simplest example of cyber physical system, which is a device. CPS can also be a system wherein you can be having multiple systems connected together or coming together. So it can be some kind of electric car or mobility solution where there will be air condition within the car, entertainment system within the car. I can also be having few more other systems which are there inside the car, and that becomes one more manifestation of a cyber physical. What we are today interested in is the third manifestation of the cyber physical system, which is called as a system of systems. So right from the device like variable or a system like automobile, we can actually have a canvas of CPS going to the system of system, which we talk about the power grid, or people also call this as smart cities and all those kind of verticals. So having understood this, just a last slide to complete the theoretical part here is that how is this CPS and IoT different? Because that's a quite debate which goes on when people discuss with each other. And there is no difference between these two. These are two communities understanding the same problem. So the people who work on information and communication technology, typically computer science engineers or IT engineer, would be happy calling this as IoT or Internet of Things. People like me who works in systems, dynamics, control, etc., they are more comfortable of calling this phenomena as a cyber physical system. So CPS is the visualization of a systems theory group, whereas IoT is a perception of people work in the IT industry. However, they mean exactly same. At least from cybersecurity point of view, there is no difference between these two terminologies. So that was a bulk I wanted to introduce to you. How can we look at this problem? Because when I say cyber attack on energy network, probably the question comes, as I mentioned, as a research community, where is the role to play for me? That is for the police to find it out. Or maybe my Indian army to find it out who did that. So where is the research potential available here? So I wanted to just give you the idea how researchers are looking at it from the analysis point of view. There are a few more things from solution point of view, how the research comes in picture, that would come towards the end slide. But the question now, many of you, after having the introduction, motivation examples, and some part of the cyber physical approach to that, may be thinking about, so what is so great about this? Because we have banking and finance, which is much complex. At every road, every corner, I have ATM centers. I can do UPI payment from my mobile. I am having e-commerce site, which are having almost 1 million transactions per second. I have Bombay Stock Exchange, where people do so much of digital share trading and other things. Are they not securing their system? Then why are we worried as an energy sector being target of cyber attack? Or is this so much of unnecessarily hue and cry that people are making? Can we not use the solutions which are much effectively being used by that IT-oriented banking, finance and other things? So can we not deploy that in my substation? Can I not have some security solution in my substation which takes care of cyber attacks? As it is there in some ATM center or as it is there on some kind of e-commerce platform. Can I not have firewall in my substation and leave everything to it to ensure that my systems are secure? So probably they may be the couple of questions that you may be having as of now. So can I not use firewalls? I have worked a lot in cryptography and I know that I can use AES, DES and such kind of high-end cryptographical solutions which may probably ensure the security of my data or information. Can I not use antivirus? Because that's the easiest way which can come to our mind, that I would have some antivirus and my systems will be secure, because that's what is taught to us, at least at the desktop or laptop level of understanding. That may be the one question which people may be having. And the problem is, neither of that is useful. That's a grave problem, and that's why I said next decade will be of cyber attack on critical infrastructure. This is the reason I mentioned and made that statement. Reason number one is, firewalls cannot be used because my substation communication happens in certain protocols like IEC 61850 or 101, 104, ICCP, Modbus, and those kind of things. Whereas my firewalls can understand only TCP, UDP, and that type of language. So if I'm not understanding what these two devices are talking about, how can I infer whether there is some kind of malicious communication happening or not? So the problem number one is, my IT firewalls cannot protect in my OT environment because I talk in different language. My protocol communications are different. Not only they are different, but they are proprietary as well. So ABB may have their own protocol. Siemens may have their own protocol. GE may have their own protocol, the way in which they communicate. And these protocols are legacy protocols. For last 40, 50 years, they may be there in my installation. So I'm unable to understand the language. I cannot go for deep packet inspection and other features of my firewall. High-end encryption, to forget about it. The reason is, if I'm having AES, DES, 128, 256-bit key, whatever cryptography you talk about, my major problem is my IED or RTU connected in the field is not having that computation power. It is not like your high-end server. So I have problem of computation power. More than that, if I encrypt some trip command to the breaker, that encryption itself might take some 10 nanosecond, 20 nanosecond, and the decryption might take another same amount of time, whereas I want my breaker to trip in just 2 or 3 cycles itself. So the amount of time which goes in encryption and decryption in itself will render my action useless, because by that time some activity must have already happened, and then I would be giving command after, much later than that. So that is the issue. And problem with antivirus is, I don't know how many of you are aware about how this antivirus works is, they work on signature. That's why if you are deployed antivirus in your laptop or desktop, you get updates quite often. And what this update does is, these antivirus companies, they collect threat intel from across the world, and those signatures are checked whether they are matching with your laptop or desktop or not. If it is matching, it will say that so and so virus was detected. On the critical infrastructure, the Stuxnet that we talked about, or the Ukrainian power attack that we talked about, or for that matter, the Kudankulam nuclear power plant, these are specially crafted malware. They are not generically being spread. So the signature of that would be available to you only when the attack or incident has happened. So there is no point in having the antivirus, because the signature itself is the first time and the last time. Probably you may not be getting it multiple recurrences, at least in the same form. It may come back, but it may come back in a much modified version. So all these things are making life much difficult in case of security of OT systems. So IT systems, as we talked about, are well secure, firewall, cryptography, and antivirus, and few more other things. But for OT, it is not possible for me. So I would be having a major difficulty here. So the difficulty that these people face is cyber related impact or risk is generally measured by CIA triad. If you're not from that background, it stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So for IT, banking, finance, etc., what matters more is confidentiality. Then comes integrity. Then comes availability. But for energy network, for power grid, what is important for me is the grid should be live 24/7 without any disturbance. And the disturbance is not just outage, but even the frequency variation might damage my equipments which are connected. Not just the power, availability of the power, but quality of the power in terms of harmonics and other is also required to be ensured. So that puts a lot of restrictions on my solution space. So the challenges, if I am to talk about, before we talk about the solution, so I said that we have 3 stages in the talk. First one was to sensitize about the problem. Second one is to talk about the challenges, and lastly to end up with the solution. So challenges that we have are at 3 different layers. The first layer is, I am having legacy system for last 30, 40 years because I may be having some thermal power plant designed, commissioned some 30 years back. That time nobody ever thought about that it would ever undergo any cyber attack. So those were all designed without security in mind. So insecure by design is the major problem. Second is, on that insecure by design, I want to jump with the IoT layer, AI, machine learning, and all those things. So I am putting all those insecure by design legacy system with this cyber physical layer. And third change or third major challenge is, the adversaries are not college going kids, but they are nation state actors. So they have full money, they have all resources. That is actually making my life challenging. And if I am to then look at the solution, then people are looking solution because there cannot be a silver bullet which can solve all the problems. So one need to focus on people, process, and technologies. So people, it means making them cyber aware, better cyber hygiene. Processes means standardization, best practices, the cybersecurity maturity indicators, etc. will come. And technologies is where some kind of scientific advancement required to happen so as to address the problems of the critical infrastructure security. So since we are mainly from technology background, we would focus on the last aspect, technology. One of the best practice, of course, I just put this slide here, that how traditional wisdom can help us to solve this. Since the power, if I am to talk about typically the power grid type of scenario, which is spread across thousands of kilometers, and probably you may not have a better networking systems because of the legacy nature. So one of the very classical example how our forefathers used to protect themselves is by a layered approach. So if the enemy could breach somehow one layer, there should be one more layer here. So people used to call this as defense in depth or layer-wise approach. Rather than having one solution, you can be having multiple solutions in a layer fashion. So here I would talk now from the technology point of view. So initially I mentioned something about the modeling and other aspect. Hardcore mathematical people are working in that domain, as the madam's talk was earlier. So a lot of people and a lot of attention, particularly in the US universities, is from the mathematical viewpoint, and others are developing certain AI, ML, and other solutions. So let me just now, towards the end of my session, talk about where the academia is geared about providing the solution. So one usual solution is basically something called as a data diode. So I'm sure diode, everybody is well aware in the first, second year itself. Nowadays, it comes in CBSE 12 standard itself. So the one which allows you the current to flow only when forward bias, reverse it doesn't. So what this data diode says is, they have developed something called as a Purdue model. So Purdue University has came up with something called as Purdue model. And what this Purdue model says is, they have defined certain layers of IT and OT. and way in which data transfer should happen. Air gap, we mentioned that it is now vanished. There is nothing like air gap. How can I try to mimic the air gap is the solution which is provided by data diode. So it would be regulating, restricting, sanitizing the flow of information going from IT to OT and OT to IT. And since it is a data diode, it would be allowing it to only go in one direction. So if I'm having, let us say, NTPC's thermal power plant and my current generation is 500 megawatt, probably NTPC chairman or managing director would like to see in a dashboard how much is the generation in one plant of NTPC, second, third, fourth, etc. So data can go from my industrial control system OT up, but it is not permitted to go down, at least which are command and control signals. A lot of people are working on AI/ML solution, which are called as user and entity behavior analytics. So let's say that I have, if I'm to take liberty about that Kudankulam nuclear power plant, where a machine got compromised, and then it was trying to spread. So generally when this attack happens, it spreads. And a lot of people from mathematical background are working on game theory approach, again using Shapley's theorem and other, that how the propagation happens. They call this as artificial immune system, identifying the epidemic hub and how the spread of the malware happens. So a lot of mathematical work is currently going on to identify how the spread happens. Along with that, the attacker threat modeling is one more very prudent mathematical area where people are using Markov chain approach, the random walk approach, how it goes from one machine to other machine, how the steps can be calibrated for hardening my actual systems. So all those things are being done under the title of user and entity behavior analytics. So there can be some kind of simplest can be anomaly detection. So I know that I work in a company, daily I come at 9 o'clock and go at 5 p.m. and suddenly somebody monitors that my computer is sending some data at 9 p.m. in the night, which is not supposed to be my usual behavior. So the simplest understanding of UAB can be anomaly detection. Now for cyber attack, it is a challenging machine learning problem because this is imbalanced data set problem. The reason is you would be having huge amount of examples of your normal behavior and very few examples which depict about the cyber attack. So if machine learning is to be used, the approach that people are using is both at the control plane and the data plane, how can I address this imbalanced data set problem? So there are a lot of solutions which people are currently coming up. One of the very early solution for such kind of imbalanced data set problem was support vector machines or SVMs, because it doesn't matter to me the entire data. What matters to me only are the support vectors, and I can very easily deal with the imbalanced data set problem. However, that is becoming now inefficient because the kind of data which get generated with a lot of IoT devices, this would be an interesting area further. People are trying to work on network segmentation, zones and conduits. One interesting solution that people are doing, particularly academia, is basically to have honeypots. And most of the US, Europe universities, just to collect the data, understand the behavior of the attacker, and then put a mathematical model on top of that, are using honeypots so as to track the lateral movements. We talked about a limitation of industrial firewalls, which doesn't understand OT protocol. So nowadays, major OEMs are coming up with OT firewalls who can understand the protocol used in the power grid network. As I mentioned, couple of those like Modbus, 61850, etc. There is a huge demand in intrusion detection system. Again, they hugely rely on the data analytics part. So they collect logs from the network devices and they try to find out if there is any anomaly or not. So at the base engine, they would be having anomaly detection, and that anomaly detection is at data plane and the control plane as well. False data injection is typically addressed by electrical community by load flow analysis. Because if the load flow is not converging, that used to be an indicator that something is going wrong. So here also people are trying to work on false data injection. And then of course, from people process point of view, what matters is how can you sensitize the people work in that plant so that the passwords can be changed and all those things which basically are behavioral and the hygiene based kind of solutions. So I think now I got just 1 minute and I'm on the dot here to conclude my session. So idea was to basically introduce to you the topic which would be very much under the discussions both in academia as well as industry for the next decade. The way in which the cyber attacks are happening, the solutions indeed are required from the technology community as well. So with this, I conclude my session.